Good morning, Hare Krishna. Glad to see everyone here today. We're here at the Bhaktivedanta Institute headquarters. We're continuing our Richard L. Thompson lecture series. We've been going through 6 of Sariputa's books, chapter by chapter. Our last session was Hugo Stetz. He gave a presentation on chapter 7, Redshifts and the Expanding Universe. And today, our presenter is Prishni Sutton. She's presenting on chapter 8, Questions and Answers. Prishni has graduated with a double major in mathematics and chemistry from the University of Illinois in 1971, became involved with ISKCON shortly thereafter. Since 2014, she has been the archivist for the Richard L. Thompson Archives, and she's been the secretary treasurer for the Bhaktivedanta Institute for Higher Studies since its formation in 2015. Thanks, Prishni.
Thank you. Okay. First, I want to just thank the Bhaktivedanta Institute for Higher Studies for kindly for hosting this nice lecture series. We're down to the wire here. We're almost done with this Vedic Cosmography and Astronomy. This is the last chapter I'm going to be speaking on, but we do have 2 appendices, which are really important to kind of wrap up the book. And really, I think the appendices really highlight Sariputa's approach to how he deals with the topics. So that will be on November 4th. Chapter 8, Questions and Answers. And of course, as you know, this is from Sariputa's pioneering work, Vedic Cosmography and Astronomy. He was one of the founding members of the Bhaktivedanta Institute in 1976. And as we learned when we did the introduction, he wrote this book following the instructions of Srila Prabhupada, who did ask the members of the Bhaktivedanta Institute to study the 5th canto and prepare a model for the Vedic planetarium. Okay, so this is a series of questions in this chapter, 33 questions, and this was written about 1990, so that's 34 years ago. And it's amazing how these questions are still amazingly pertinent today, and I actually get asked these questions all the time. So we're going to see how Sariputta handled it, and then I'll also make a few comments here and there about things that we've done recently that address this issue. Okay, so there's 33 questions. They were given in kind of random order in the chapter, I thought, so I grouped them into topics. And I'm going to go through, it's going to be a little long, but I'm going to go through all 33 questions because I think they're all important. I'll spend as little time as I can on each one to try to at least give you the idea. Please feel free to ask questions as we go along because some of this stuff is a little technical. And it might help just, clear up a question as it comes up rather than wait until the end of the presentation. Okay, so the first group that I came up with, because it's based on the first question that he does ask in the chapter, and this is about moon, earth, sun distances. This is a big issue. Just last year, I was at a talk, and the first question someone asked is this very question. Question 1, the Vedic literature says the moon is higher than the sun. How can this be? I get asked this, all the time. And so Sariputta gives a really nice explanation in Vedic cosmography. He continues and takes it a little further in Mysteries of the Sacred Universe. And so the basic concept here is, what does the word above, or what does the word height, how is that being used in the Puranas? Especially in the Srimad Bhagavatam 5th canto. So you have to understand just a little bit about astronomy, not much. But I think this diagram I got from Raleigh Gopal's PowerPoint that he used when he did a whole seminar on Mysteries of the Sacred Universe. And I think this should clarify it pretty well for everybody. Here we're looking at a geocentric view of the solar system. So here's the Earth in the middle. Here's the sun, and for standing on the Earth, we're going to see the sun go around the Earth. That's what it looks like from our point of view. This path that the sun takes is called the ecliptic plane. It's the apparent path of the sun around the Earth. Now we're going to look at the path of the moon. The moon also goes around the Earth, right? So it's going along this path here. But you'll notice that the 2 orbits, and all orbits, as I'm sure you all know, are in a plane. All orbits, all planets, all heavenly bodies orbit in a plane. So you'll notice the planes are tilted, all right? So the way that Sariputta understands height. And he does all kinds of research, and it's phenomenal how accurate this understanding of height is. As he explains that height or above is not talking about distance from Earth, which would be from here to here in the case of the moon, or from here to here in the case of the sun. What it's talking about is the height above Bhumandala, which he shows to be very, very close to the ecliptic plane. So if you think of Bhumandala, which is what the Puranas always is talking about, it doesn't really directly discuss a spherical Earth planet. You can know in this particular case, it's talking about the ecliptic plane. Then the height becomes how far in the farthest, apex of these orbits, you have the upper and the lower ones, how far does it get from the ecliptic plane? So you just drop a perpendicular from that height. He goes over here to the edge and drops his perpendicular. And that's the height they're talking about. How high is it above the ecliptic plane? All the orbits of the planets have some inclination like this. They're all slightly different. And they're going to give this height here. And here you can see a little table that explains all that. So that's kind of the basis for this whole moon, earth, sun distance confusion, is that people are thinking that height or above means relative to its distance from the earth sphere, but actually in the Puranas they're talking about this ecliptic plane here. Okay, question 2. This has caused some consternation. Actually, Steve today is here, and ask him after the talk. Please ask him about this. This is a quote from Prabhupada in Srimad Bhagavatam. The sun is supposed to be 93 million miles above the surface of the earth. Distance from this is actually distance. This number is how we see the distance between the sun and the earth. And from Srimad Bhagavatam, we understand that the moon is 1,600,000 miles above the sun. Therefore, the distance between the earth and the moon would be about 95 million miles. So you look at that and you go, huh? We know the moon is not 95 million miles away. So what's going on here? And Sadaputta, I think, he just explains it very simply. He says, Srila Prabhupada is simply making the point that if you put together the Bhagavatam and modern astronomy, you tend to get a contradictory picture. But more on this later. I hope Steve can clarify that. Do you want to speak up right now, Steve? Because you have a real nice way of answering that, I think.
Once listening to Prabhupada's, they have compilations of all his recordings, and I was listening to it just in chronological sequence. And then I forget what year it was, maybe it was 76 or so. In the summer, he started talking like this out of the blue. And I'm wondering, where is this coming from? And I was talking to this old timer. Not that I'm not an old timer myself at this point, but he was saying, "Oh, that was the summer. That's when the fifth candle came out." And so these things are coming up, in the minds of people who are involved at the time. And then the thing that really tripped my mind is here, supposedly the fifth candle, it's all traditional, this and that. And here he is, Prabhupada's using a figure from modern science, because they didn't have accurate measurements to the sun until more recently, whereas the ancient Greeks had fairly accurate measurements to the moon. And then we're talking about the moon from this other tradition, So what's all this mixing and matching? And then the thought that came to my mind is, he's got all these devotees reading the fifth canto, and it's like, what the heck is going on here? And it was just a big pushback that, confusing the issue in some respects by mixing and matching these two traditions. Allegedly, it's all anti-science, but here he was using figures that's definitely a recent figure. So I don't know, there was some complexity there. I mean, assuming Prabhupada wasn't just fell off the watermelon wagon. I mean, he might have had some things going on in his mind where suddenly he's bringing this up and mixing these figures and this and that. These different measurements from different traditions in this nature.
Okay, that clarifies that a little bit.
Well, or confuses it in a progressive way.
There you go. Question 3. If the distance from the Earth to the Sun is 800,000 miles, how can this be reconciled with modern astronomy? And he just goes back again to the very first picture we had, when Bhagavatam is giving, it's not distance that it gives. It's not distance, it's height above Bhumandala. And then it's all explained that way. Oh, wait, I skipped this one. Here we go. Using radar and lasers, scientists have recently obtained very accurate estimates of the Earth-Moon distance. The distance is about 238,000 miles. How do you reconcile this with Vedic calculations? And as Steve just mentioned, the ancients had very good distances to the moon because it's so close. And even the Surya Siddhanta, which is within the Vedic tradition, had this estimate, 258,000 miles, pretty dang close. I don't remember what Ptolemy is right now, but it was within the ballpark there also. Oh, I forget I can't scroll on this thing. So if the moon is 258,000 miles, so we're using the Surya Siddhanta figure here from the Earth globe, then how can it be 100,000 yojanas above the sun? Seems hard to understand. But again, it's not. As long as you think of these distances as heights above the Bhumandala plane, which corresponds to the plane of the ecliptic, then it all falls into line and makes fairly good sense. This is one of my favorites. This next one is on the moon landing, and this is a controversial issue to this day. And the question here is, what was Srila Prabhupada's position on the moon flight? There seems to be some ambiguity in his statements about this topic. And indeed, there are. I have a list I've been compiling over the years. It's, I think, about 6 pages long of every statement I come across that Prabhupada said about the moon. And then I also added to it all the different statements that Sadhaputta says about this. So it's a very interesting issue. And actually, it's going to come up in one of the talks at our upcoming conference, which is this November 17th to the 19th. And someone is going to be discussing this topic on Sunday, the 19th. So I hope you can tune in if you want to get a little more talk on that. So here in Vedic Cosmography, he has this picture, this image. And this is a famous image. It's the official NASA photograph showing the lunar module on the surface of the moon. And then Sadhaputta asked this question: should we expect to see some signs of disturbance right here in the soft lunar surface caused by the exhaust of the lunar module's descent engine? So that's a good question. And so he discusses this issue. In Vedic Cosmography, he says Prabhupada offered a number of tentative explanations as to what might have actually transpired on the moon flight, but his main point was that the astronauts could not have visited Chandraloka, which we translate as the moon, since they did not reach the civilization of the demigods that exist there. And elsewhere he said, this is another famous quote of Sadhaputta's that Radha Mohan brought up recently in one of the other talks, and it's this: the astronauts have gone to the 3-dimensional location of the moon without making the higher dimensional journey needed to actually reach the kingdom of Chandra. This would be comparable to visiting Vrindavan on the earth without being able to perceive the spiritual world that is also there. And I think those of us who have been to Vrindavan may have experienced that ourselves. You go to Vrindavan, you're looking for Krishna in the spiritual world, but you tend not to see it. So that's, I think, a nice analogy there. Sorry, who said that? It's Richard L. Thompson, Sadhaputta, the author of this book. It was in a different venue. Okay, now I piled this list. I'm not going to go through them all. These are some I thought were the most interesting statements of Prabhupada on this issue. I'm just going to look at 2 of them. You can skim through the rest if you'd like. He says right here, this is a letter to Trivikram Swami in 1976. The astronauts and scientists are all bluffing. Well, that's a pretty strong statement, right? Okay. And then he says also down here, and this is from the Nectar Devotion, of all places: though modern astronauts go to the moon with the help of spaceships, they undergo many difficulties. So we're immediately seeing there's some kind of issue here between these two. And Sadhaputta gives his explanation. And there's others, and they will come up in our conference later on. Okay, question 7. What about the argument that the moon flights were faked by the US government? And there's a case for this was made back in Sadhaputta's day in the book called We Never Went to the Moon by Bill Kaysing. And Sadhaputta's comment, and this is one of the early debunkers, right? The debunkers of the moon flight, and there's debunkers of the debunkers now. Although this book made some interesting points, its arguments are basically speculative and circumstantial. And I happen to be into this issue, and I've watched dozens of documentaries debunking the moon flight. And I do find the same thing. They're speculative and circumstantial, but somehow or other, they're very convincing. So we do need to deal with that.
Can you comment?
Yes, please.
I discussed this with Sariputta several times. And what got Sariputta concerned is when they're on the way to the moon, they're reporting their location and velocity. Being the mathematician he was, he tracked it out. And that would never take him to the moon. The numbers just wouldn't work.
Yeah.
So he said, something's wrong here. Then later on, he had the epiphany of what it was. And he said, yeah, we did go to the moon. We went,
Yeah.
the astronauts went, and that's a whole other discussion, what that means, the significance, higher dimensions. That's a different discussion. They did go, but he realized the Americans, no way are they going to tell the Russians what the trajectory ought to be, the Soviets.
Right.
So he said, yeah, the numbers were faked, but everything was faked. I mean, at that time, the only map of the city of Moscow that was good was the CIA's map.
Yeah.
Because the Soviets' map had all wrong streets because they thought they were going to be invaded.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
I mean, that was well known. I mean,
Yeah.
Thomas Wolfe did that famous, I think it was Wolfe, did a famous essay about how all the technology for the moon landing was really easily transferable to intercontinental ballistic missiles.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
I mean, I think
exactly.
it was Thomas Wolfe.
Yes.
And I have a foggy memory, but
Yeah.
it's very
Yeah.
public
Yeah.
about all that.
So it's clear to me from having watched so many documentaries on this that the films are phony. They are phony. That was fake, but I think we went to the moon also. But they faked all the stuff that they put on TV. The next big category, and this comes up again and again and again in Vedic cosmography discussions, is the geographic features that are described in the fifth canto of the Bhagavatam, because they are fantastic. Okay, question 8. How are we to make sense of the enormous mountains described in the fifth canto? Some of them, including the Himalayas, there's the Himalayan range right here, and this is the Earth, planet, are said to be 80,000 miles high. That's 10 times the diameter of the Earth. So what are these huge mountains? Why don't we see them? What are they? And Sariputta gives this, this is, first book he wrote on cosmography, the fairly simple answer. We suggest that the cosmic mountains of the fifth canto are higher dimensional. They are real. To see them is necessary to develop the sensory powers of the demigods and great yogis. And I think it's a fine answer, and you can stand by that answer. But I think we've done a lot. We've done a lot of work, both mostly within ISKCON and a lot of it within the Bhaktivedanta Institute, that is grappling with this issue. So what are these mountains, and what does this huge height actually mean? Why is this there? So we'll have more of that again at the conferences coming up. Question 9, very similar. If the Garbhodak Ocean fills half the universe, and this is not just the Bhagavatam that's saying this, all the Puranas say this, and many ancient cultures have this same concept that half the universe is filled with water. Okay, what is that? Here's a picture from Pavaneshwar's book, Bhagavat Cosmology. And it's a nice little picture here. Is the universe. You can see the layers here. This is his rendition of Bhumandala. It's a little different than the way Sariputta visualizes it. But nevertheless, here it is. And you'll notice right below this Bhumandala, it's brown. It's made of dirt. It's earth. It's rock. There's this Garbha Ocean. Well, what is this? So if Sariputta, in his book Vedic Cosmography, he says he argued that this should be either the southern celestial hemisphere. So that means if it's the southern celestial hemisphere, that would mean that Bhumandala is the equatorial plane, and we have several models actually current right now that have Bhumandala as the equatorial plane, or this Garbhodak Ocean is the region to the south of the ecliptic plane, and that's what we looked at earlier in this, is that Sariputta prefers the model Bhumandala as the ecliptic plane, and this would be the area region of the celestial sphere that's south of the ecliptic. Question 10, this is a very simple, this is a typo, and they do come up even in the Srimad Bhagavatam. In verse 15, 17, 6, they say that Bhadravarsh is to the west of Mount Meru, and they also say Ketumala Varsh is to the west. Well, it's a simple typo, Prabhupada. Sariputta. You can go anywhere else, and it just somehow came out west when it should have been east. So that clears up that question. This one is this one's fun. 12 is 11 is just pretty straightforward. Another typo, it seems. This is 516.5. Jamadweep is described as being Jamadweep. That's this plain, of course. You probably know that's the central island of Saptadweep, and it's described as 100,000 yojanas across. And that figure comes up again and again and again, except when you get to this verse 516.5, it's 1,000,000 yojanas wide. I look at it, and Sariputta looked at it as a typo. It's the best we can do with that. Maybe someone else has some realizations on that they can share. I don't know. Speak up if you do. Yeah, we come back.
Solve that easily.
You can. Well, it's not that easy. I think some have done it. It's still tricky.
Okay.
It's a tricky one, but we need to do it. This one is this has a very interesting answer, and I got this from Sulabha, who's worked with us. He works particularly on Puranic geography. So we have a couple verses later, 516.7, we have the top of Mount Meru. And this is an important geographic feature. This top of Mount Meru is the it's inhabited by the demigods. And so you have Brahma, creator of the universe, right in the center, right here. And you see the little Brahmapuri, right here. It's said that his abode, Brahmapuri, extends for 10 million yojanas, whereas the top is described as being only 32,000 yojanas across. So what does this mean? He says, is Brahmapuri hanging way over the edge? But I hadn't thought of this. And either did Sariputta, but Sulabha came up with this one. If you square the number 32,000, you get 10 million. Very close to it, almost exactly. So it could simply be, again, a kind of typo in the Bhagavatam, where the scribe, when he was saying, should have said square yojanas, but left out the square, and so we're all thinking it's linear yojanas. So that's what Sariputta says is we do not know the explanation for the other figures, which is so he didn't think of that one, but that does kind of clear it up. This topic is still a difficult one. And I think we all need to be familiar with this issue if we're going to have, any understanding of any kind of ancient cosmology, and particularly Puranic cosmology. And this is precession and the pole star. And again, all your ancient cultures have all kinds of things to say about this issue. A lot of modern scholars seem to doubt that ancients knew about precession. They all knew the pole star because you can look up and see it. But precession, there's some controversy. In case you don't know, I think most of you here know what precession is. Very quickly, you can look at this wonderful little diagram I got, I think, on Encyclopedia Britannica. So the Earth is tilted 23.5 degrees from the ecliptic plane. So the ecliptic plane is blue. This green plane is the equatorial plane. Both candidates for Bhumandala, as we saw earlier. But the Earth does tilt according to this to the ecliptic plane at 23.5 degrees. So it spins around on that axis, but it also slowly, like any kind of top will do, if you spin a top, people don't do it so much these days, but they did when I was a kid. And the top, can you see my finger? Can anyone see me? Yeah. So the top will gyrate. As it spins, it also very slowly goes around in a circle, maintaining its angle at all times, whatever angle it happens to be on. So as it does that, the pole star is constantly changing because the spin axis is moving along this great circle right here. Now, if we take this great circle and we get below here and we look up at it, right? So this is what this circle looks like. If you're looking up on the celestial sphere, you'll see that. And you'll notice this little dotted line here, that's the ecliptic pole. That's perpendicular to the ecliptic plane. And so that ecliptic pole will go right through the center of this circle. And this shows how the pole star changes. Right now, we're right here at Polaris. You go back a little bit in time, maybe 2,000 years, maybe 3, I don't know the exact number. Kubain was the pole star that was right here. We're going to go sometime into the future. I don't know the exact dates. It takes 26,000 years to make this whole cycle around. We'll go to Eri. Then here's one, Aldebaran. It comes around very close to Vega. Then we get very close to Iota Hercules. And then eventually we'll come back to Tubane and back to Polaris. So this concept of the pole star moving is difficult because it's identified with Dhruva Loka, and the word Dhruva means fixed. So we run into a little bit of a problem here. And so how do we deal with it? I deal with it personally by seeing Dhruva Loka as a disk, not as a point in space. If you think of Dhruva Loka, most lokas are often described as having disk-like form. Bhumandala, after all, is a disk. If you look at many of the diagrams done by so many scholars, they picture these different lokas as disks. So for me, Dhruva Loka being a disk is not a problem. And so when the pole star shifts, it still stays within Dhruva Loka. So in this disk that's inscribed by the poles, that's one way you can look about it. Sariputta notes that this precession is described in the Jyotisha Shastras, which are a natural part of the Vedic tradition. He also pulls out some research done by other scholars, famous research done by De Santillana and Van Decken. This is a book, Hamlet's Mill. Anyone interested in any kind of ancient cosmology, and particularly Purana cosmology, needs to read this book. I have a PDF of it. If anyone's interested, just let me know. And if you want to come to the house, you can pick it up and read it, a hard copy as well. So he discusses this at length, how the ancients were very well aware of the precession equinox. We also have more modern work. This was done in 1946, modern compared to the Puranas, by Stella Kramrich. And I didn't get the year on this one. Jane Sellers, more recent, also does research on the precession equinox in ancient cosmologies. Did I skip anything? No. Higher dimensions. This can be a little controversial, and it can be a little vague. Sariputta coined the phrase higher dimensions. He borrowed it from math. He has a PhD in math. So he used the concept of dimensionality that's used to do abstract mathematics. And for a mathematician to understand higher dimensions, because I was trained in math, I never had an issue with it, because I used to work in n dimensions. In real analysis, you deal with as many dimensions as you want, and it's not a problem mathematically. It's a little hard for some people to conceptualize. So he uses this term, he tries to explain it. And so question 14, to my knowledge, Srila Prabhupada never hinted at explanations of other dimensions. Why didn't he save us a lot of trouble by bringing this out years ago? Okay, that's a valid question. Sariputta gives this answer, which you can accept or not. I accept it. The Vedic literature does not implicitly refer to higher dimensional space. I'm sorry, I said that absolutely wrong. The Vedic literature does refer implicitly to higher dimensional space. So it's an implicit reference. They don't use the word higher dimension. But what he goes on to say, and he says it down here, is that, he answers it on question 16, is that what he means by higher dimensional is that there are other levels of reality that are perceived by different kinds of beings. So that's what he means by higher dimensional. 15, if we could visit the moon, would the inhabitants be visible to us or invisible? Good question. We hear all these descriptions from the Puranas and other ancient scriptures that there's people that live on the moon, right? Will we see them? We don't hear to see them. But Prabhupada answered this because someone asked him that very question, and he said they would be almost invisible with more subtle material bodies. So that's, you can parse that. It's been parsed in many different ways, and we could do an entire conference probably just on this. What are these other, how many is it, 400,000 human species that are described in the Vedas? What kinds of bodies do they have? It's not an easy question. And this is very important, question 16. Couldn't it be that the denizens of higher planets are invisible to us simply because they have subtle bodies? Now, you have to understand that it depends on how you use the word subtle. In the Bhagavad Gita and in the Puranas, this word subtle refers to the material energies of Krishna, which are considered mind, intelligence, and ego. So if you want to say, well, somehow these higher living entities are just, their bodies are made up of just mind, intelligence, and ego. The problem with that is that if you read the descriptions more carefully, it's described that you go to these heavenly planets and they have chariots and they have dinners and they play instruments and they fight battles. And when they sit down, they don't pass through their chair. It's solid. So the descriptions, they're describing a three-dimensional continuum that to the people there is just as solid as the three-dimensional continuum that we have here. So to say it's subtle is a little bit misleading. And that becomes real important when we get into hermeneutics, which we'll, again, be discussing at the conference on all of Sunday, November 19, is devoted to the hermeneutics and epistemology of the Puranas. Okay. And this is fun. So if these realms are real and they really are living entities there, but they may normally be inaccessible to us, but there should be some trace, some empirical evidence. And this came up with, I believe it's either Doug or Hugo in one of the last two talks we had, that when they postulate dark matter, modern times, the reason they can do that is because there's evidence that it exists. They can't see it because it's dark matter. It doesn't have interact with the electromagnetic fields, so you can't see it, you can't experience it, but you have to see traces of it. And of course, the traces they see with dark matter is a shift in the way gravity works. Oh, that means there must be some other matter there because it's having an effect on gravity. So Sariputta lists many things. I picked up these two because I had really cool images of them, and I happen to like both of these kinds of things. So the first one here, this is the what's it called? Nazca lines. Nazca. Forgive me here. So these are dated by archaeologists and anthropologists to be about 500 BC to BCE to 500 CE. It's a long time ago, 2,000 years ago. And this is an aerial shot, and this is the tarantula. This great tarantula has been somehow or other 2,000 years ago traced out in these deserts way up in a plateau somewhere. Very bizarre. There's many of these. How do you explain this? Very hard for modern science to explain how anybody could have even made these. Back 2,000 years ago, but here it is.
How big is that?
I wish I knew. I kicked myself. I was going to look it up last night, but I didn't get to it. So somebody might know. It's huge.
It's pretty big. I mean, they've taken pictures from airplanes.
Yeah, they're huge. They're huge. No one knew they were there until they had airplanes. You couldn't see them. There's just some tracing, but if you follow it around, you have no idea you're tracing out a huge tarantula. You get up in an airplane and someone goes, "Hey, look, there's a huge tarantula down there. How'd that get there?" So these are a bit of a mystery. So, but that's again, empirical evidence. Something's going on. The other one that's really fun is crop circles. And if you were around in 1970s, this was a huge event in England. I think where was it? In fields of southern England, these crop circles appear, and a lot of discussion on this. And the interesting thing is when you actually examine how they were made, the way that the impressions are made, no one is able to duplicate it, because whenever they try to do that, it breaks some of the stems, but none of the stems are broken. They're just bent. It's a mystery, and Sariputta uses that as some kind of empirical evidence as well. 19.
If you were curious, the particular one, just a quick Google search, says was about 150 feet across, but other ones are like 50 miles.
Oh, this one I picked was the small one.
Yeah.
That was a mistake.
The tarantula was small.
Yeah, apparently. And if you can find how big this crop circle is, that would be interesting too. I did not note that. And
Do you know the name of it?
No, you can look. There's so many crop circles. So if you happen to find it, let us know at the end. But there's all kinds of other evidence that maybe don't give such nice, easy images that I wanted to have for this discussion. This, of course, is a huge discussion, philosophy and hermeneutics, and a lot of questions come up that relate to those issues. Number 19, and I've been asked this by many people. What is your justification for going into these arguments in detail? After all, We don't need to understand this stuff to be spiritually enriched, right? It's not a requirement. You don't have to understand cosmology. You don't have to understand these verses in the Bhagavatam. Why are you doing it? And here's the answer that I always use. Sadhuputta uses it. It's a pretty easy answer. Prabhupada ordered some of his disciples to do this for the sake of preaching. In a letter to Swarup Damodar, dated April 27, 1976. Now remember, the BI was founded, incorporated in December of 76, but all of the people who did wind up on the corporation document met in Washington, D.C. during the bicentennial in July of 1976. It's an interesting fact. So they were all gathered there. But first, Prabhupada sent out this letter to Bhakti Swarup Damodar, who was the original director of the Institute. Now our PhDs must collaborate and study the fifth canto to make a model for building the Vedic planetarium. So now all you PhDs must carefully study the details of the fifth canto and make a working model of the universe. And so that's why Sadhuputta did it, because Prabhupada told him to do that. He took it up rather than some of the other members of the Bhaktivedanta Institute, because his degrees in math and astronomy are, next door neighbors. So here's a little picture of the Vedic planetarium. They're built, actually, this is all built now, pretty much. And when he wrote this book, of course, we mentioned at the beginning that he was thinking, oh, now I'm presenting a model for the to use in the Vedic planetarium. Question 20, what is the justification for bringing in the works of Indian mathematical astronomy, such as the Surya Siddhanta and Siddhanta Shiromani? And again, this comes up a lot, especially when people are talking about the TOVP, because they do, and the various models that they put forth do rely on the Surya Siddhanta. Here's the cover of the translation done by Danivir Maharaj back, I think it was 2004, maybe 2006. I'm sorry, I don't have the exact date here. And he actually based his translation on the Bengali translation of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, which gives it a certain very, bona fide aura to it. But Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati cited these works from the Siddhanta, both the Surya Siddhanta and the Siddhanta Shiromani, which was penned by Bhaskar in the 11th century of AD. So he does cite these in his writings, and Prabhupada cites both of these, Siddhanta Shiromani and Surya Siddhanta, in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, and other Vaishnava commentators also cite these. So that's the justification. Question 21, does this mean that we have to accept Jyotisha Shastras as absolute truth on the level of Srimad Bhagavatam? And the simple answer is no. No. Srimad Bhagavatam is considered to be the spotless Purana. Okay, it's in a special class as far as Gaudiya Vaishnava theology is concerned. The Jyotisha Shastras, Sadhuputta calls them handbooks for the execution of astronomical calculations. So, you have a car, you have an owner's manual. You need the owner's manual. It's not something you're going to print up in the encyclopedia, but you're real glad you have it. It's a necessary publication that you rely on. Okay. This is a very difficult question. This is question 22. It's about Bhaktivinoda, spiritual master of Bhaktisiddhanta. Okay. Bhaktivinoda Thakur has said that the descriptions of hell are allegorical. Why don't you just accept the fifth canto as an allegory and leave it at that? Okay, why don't we? Well, Sadhuputta, in his own way, says, well, it would indeed make things easier if we could simply accept the description of the universe in the fifth canto as an allegory. But in good conscience, we cannot do so. So he describes how Bhaktivinoda was working in a particular milieu. The teachings of Lord Chaitanya, Bhakti Yoga, were basically non-existent. They had almost completely disappeared because of internal deviations, which was more or less in those days, the Sahaja groups were just wreaking havoc on Bhakti Yoga and giving it a really bad name. And then he had to deal with all the Western propaganda because this is during the British occupation. So Sadhuputta suggests that he may have found it pragmatic to give credibility to the Srimad Bhagavatam to call the hellish descriptions allegorical. But He quotes Prabhupada here, 1341, Srimad Bhagavatam. And this is something we can't overlook. We should not, therefore, reject the stories and histories of the Puranas as imaginary. The great rishis like Vyas had no business putting some imaginary stories in their literature. So Satiputta, following this, because his spiritual master is Bhaktivedanta Prabhupada, so he takes this up seriously to not reject these descriptions as allegorical. He tries to find the meaning in them, and he did so in this book. Question 23. This actually, you may be hard to believe, when the fifth canto first came out, there were several devotees that left the movement. So here's the question: what can be said in general about such apparent contradictions in the Bhagavatam? Does it mean that we should not have faith in it as a source of absolute truth? And it's actually an obstacle for me when the fifth canto came out. I was a fairly new devotee at that time, and when I saw the fifth canto, I really had serious issues. As I'm reading it, I'm going, this sounds like mythology. This is what I've tried to get away from my entire life, is people telling me things that aren't true. And I was very, very upset. But fortunately, Satiputta came out with this Vedic Cosmography and saved the day for me. But I like this, and this answer that Satiputta gives here in Vedic Cosmography. This is a great impetus for anyone who wants to do research on this topic. He says, in many cases, the discrepancy may have an explanation that we cannot guess because we have too little information. And this does come up, and I came up with this example because I was so happy to see this. This is from a PowerPoint of a presentation that Doug gave in 2020 at our second cosmography workshop, and it was called An Embedded Time Dimension in the Fifth Canto. And this explains something to me that I had not understood. And this is about the famous Maharaj Priyavrata creating the 7 dweepas and oceans of Bhumandala with the rims of his chariot wheel. So that seems really weird. How does that create what does this mean? And Satiputta commented at the time, we can easily see how very large chariot produce circular ruts that would become oceans, but it's not so easy to see how we can produce spherical planets by a chariot going around the sun and leaving ruts with its wheels. But this little picture, this is modern astrophysics, because that's Doug's field. And this is how they show the creation of the solar system. This is lovely. So the solar system starts as it's kind of a nebulous molecular gas cloud that looks kind of like this thing, right? But over time, and this is a very shortened description because I'm only talking. So over time, it's called the solar system formation epoch. It spreads out into a disk. Looks very reminiscent of Bhumandala, doesn't it? It's got the center here is looks like that could be Mount Meru right there, and then you got the rings, and it looks like these darker spaces are the oceans, and these rings here are made of this molecular gases, but sometimes referred to as stardust, right? So you have these little rings of stardust forming, and then over a period of time, and I don't think Doug is here, but if you can ask him if you want, I don't know the time scale, they coalesce and form planets. So here it is now in modern science, we actually have an explanation how by carving out these ruts like this, and I think Doug calls it orbital resonance. Orbital resonance creates these kinds of blank spaces, and the stardust begins to kind of incorporate into rings, and then it coagulates more into planets. So anyway, and this is an example of how something that made no sense to us 35 years ago now, oh yeah, well that's how rings can form planets. We have a whole description now of how that could happen. Here's our space tarantula. This is a huge one now. So we had the tarantula of the Nazca lines, tiny little thing. What was it? 100? Would you say 150 yards? 150 feet?
150 feet.
Oh, tiny little thing. What?
Wide.
So maybe it's So maybe 30 some yards long, a little bigger than a football field at least. But anyway, this is a huge space tarantula. This is a picture of deep space. This is enormous. I don't have a figure on this. I bet maybe Doug can get us one for the size of this giant space tarantula. I just thought it was interesting that we have the Nazca lines that are a tarantula, and now we found in modern times a giant space tarantula, they call it, which is a similar kind of form. And this is a very good question, which is discussed by both Doug and Hugo in the last two talks that they gave on this topic. Scientists in the 20th century have amassed huge amounts of information about distant stars and galaxies. So how can you lightly suggest that it may be seriously wrong? And Sariputta, his tone in Vedic cosmography is he doesn't say it's wrong, but he goes more towards that than I think he does in Mystery of the Sacred Universe, and more towards that than I think we're doing currently in the Bhaktivedanta Institute. He simply says there is abundant evidence in standard scientific journals to show that modern cosmological theories have serious defects. And that's true. There is plenty of evidence. But what we're doing right now, and this comes out, let me see if I have it here. No, but it'll come up in a little bit. We have work being done by one of our researchers called Dwija Govinda. He has a PhD in both physics and computational math. And he's actually doing research to show how it is that in the Bhagavatam in particular, and the Puranas in general, that vast sizes are embedded in the numbers that they give. And he does that by using yojana as a sliding scale. And that is not something new. This was done by the head Jyotisha scholar, the head astronomer for Jai Singh Jaipur back in the early 1700s. He also, we just recently came to light that he was writing on this topic of the yojana being a sliding scale. It's done by all astronomers today in anything they're going to print or put on a screen. If you don't use a sliding scale, you're going to see the full universe. The solar system would be bigger than the smallest pixel you could possibly get on a computer screen. So you're not going to be able to see anything you recognize. So they do this sliding scale business. It's done all the time. So that's one suggestion. This came up in Doug's talk about a month ago, and this is one of Brahma's favorite topics, so he might want to pitch in here. The scientists say that the spectroscopic studies show that the stars are incandescent bodies and not mere reflectors of light, because it does, in the Puranas, it gives the indication that the stars are not suns, they're reflecting the light of the sun. And these scientists have worked out in detail the thermonuclear reactions that sustain stellar radiation. How can this be reconciled within the Vedic version? This is a challenge. We have this wonderful little quote, and this is, enigmatic, but you can take it for what it's worth. This is 1975 in a letter to Swarup Damodar, who was the director of the BI in those days. The stars may have the same composition as the sun. Okay, spectroscopic studies may but they are not suns. So when I read that, I think, okay, when the Puranas are talking about the sun, they're not talking about some unique kind of composition of the sun. I think they're talking about the function, that the thing we call the sun has in these descriptions. And I think that's where I haven't seen much research on this, but I think that's where the research will go. We have the well-known quote from the Mahabharata, where Arjuna is traveling with Krishna on the chariot up through the universe. They're going to go through the coverings to get to Mahavishnu to find the dead sons of the Brahmana, right? Famous story mentioned in Krishna book also. And it says there, as they're traveling past these stars, they look very small, like tiny flames because of the distance. But when you get up to them, they're very large. And the Pandava, which is Arjuna, saw them bright and beautiful, burning on their own hearths with a fire of their own. And that's suggestive that even Mahabharata stated earlier than the Puranas by most scholars that way, way, way back they were seeing the suns as being incandescent. Sariputta also suggests that we don't really know the laws of physics are going to work when you get to those distances. So this inverse square law that we use for the propagation of light might not hold. So that's another explanation. Yeah.
Also, there's when it says there, stars made the same composition as the sun, meaning thermonuclear, whatever, but they're not the sun. Every tradition sees the sun also in a sacred space. For example, the main yoga posture in the morning is the sun pose.
Yeah.
And so there is a mystical element that has nothing to do with thermonuclear
Yes.
explosions. To me, that's the point that's being said there. Now, if somebody in another galaxy or far, far away has some other experience like that, that's also possible. But we're talking about our experience and our place.
Yeah.
And the sun definitely, and every ancient tradition holds the sun in a special sacred place.
Yeah. That's an excellent point. And I think that's what Prabhupada's getting here. But like I said, I don't think we've done sufficient. Yeah, I think we need to do more research on that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Here's a quick question. This is very easy. Isn't it true that there are fewer stars in the southern celestial hemisphere than the northern? And Sadhguru puts up these star charts, and he says very bluntly, no, it's not true. So you can look here. There's lots of stars in the northern hemisphere, lots of stars in the southern. Somehow, people have the idea that it's not that way. Perhaps, and I don't know if this is true, because with your naked eyes, when we look up, we don't see that many stars.
I had
right?
a little piece of context to this.
Yeah, please.
There's descriptions of we call it Puranic ancient cosmology, and the ancient cosmology wasn't done to teach astronomy at the university. It was done for astrological purposes and calculating sacred times. It had a whole issue, had a lot of reasons to do it. Even farmers would plant by the moon cycle, and farmers still do it, but our calendar is a solar calendar. So when we have something like Bhumandala, which, sorry for the audience today who may not have heard, but that was discussed extensively in previous lectures. But whatever it is, it's this earthly realm, or it's often described as a solar system. When they look at it, some people look at it, take an extremely simplistic, literal approach without understanding it. And what Sariputta did is he didn't do that. He did an in-depth approach to try to understand what it means in context. And it comes out to be amazing matters, including amazing correlations with modern astronomy that, almost shockingly to me, well, the hell did they know that? And because it just shouldn't be there. How far Mars is from Venus should not be known. It wasn't known until 1860s, I think. And these numbers, so it requires rolling up the sleeves and a lot of work. And the people who asked that question, I know when that question was asked, taking an overly simplistic approach to this world, which you cannot do. These are very sophisticated people and a very sophisticated subject.
Excellent.
Over.
Thank you. That was beautiful. You're here. This is actually very current. Question 27. Srila Prabhupada refers to the earth as a globe, and Srila Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Thakur made references to the Surya Siddhanta and other Jyotisha Shastras that describe the earth as a globe. But wasn't this an innovation introduced by Srila Bhaktivedanta in response to modern astronomy? And the answer to this is no. But he mentions here that earlier commentators on the Srimad Bhagavatam made reference to the Jyotisha Shastras, including the Surya Siddhanta. And I don't know, Steve, if you want to chime in now or maybe later.
Please do.
But this is a very current issue because we've had in recent times huge flat Earth initiatives that have swept through the. They've always been around, yeah.
Let me do a paid commercial announcement.
Yeah.
We have a book on this coming out next month.
It's coming out soon. We'll probably get the ebook out. We're going to get the ebook out.
Well, we'll have some printed copies.
Yeah, something.
Yeah,
we'll print something out.
Yeah. And looking at modern astronomy, ancient traditions, just dealing in a very scholarly way with that whole issue. Every year in Dallas, I don't know how they can possibly get there, but there's a worldwide conference of flat earthers.
Yeah.
And it's growing. So
it's growing. It's a scary part.
And there are some people in our society that subscribe. So we were asked to please write something scholarly about this because it's an embarrassment, and the book is coming out.
Thank goodness. Okay, and then
ask me to say something.
Please do.
No,
do you have something more to add?
Oh, I mean, I think everybody's probably pretty aware here. I mean, the idea of the Earth, perceiving the Earth as a globe, goes back to ancient times, both in the Eastern tradition and the Western tradition. the unique thing about the Eastern tradition is, on one hand, they well knew how to calculate and perceive that that's perception has a validity of the Earth, the spherical planet, but they also knew the Puranas. I can't pronounce his name. Mega.
Oh, Greek guy.
Yeah, he was the Greek ambassador to Chandragupta. So this is what 308 BC, and in his writings that we have still, or references to his writings, it was mentioning about the Indians think of the Earth as a sphere, just like the Greeks we do.
Yeah, it's just been known.
But then within the Eastern tradition, then they're also dealing with these Puranic accounts. So that's Varota Parihara, this attempting to reconcile these two seemingly very different accounts of what appears to exist out there. They were aware of this since as part of the tradition. That's not new. That's not modern science and ancient texts. That was known in the tradition.
Yeah.
Thousands of years.
So anyway, that I think it pretty much puts that question to rest. This 28 scholars say the calculations given in the Jyotisha Shastras were borrowed from the Greeks in the early centuries of the Christian era. How can you deal with this? And as Stita next on November 4th, 2 weeks from now, this is actually comes from the appendix. He brings it up in these questions here, but then he answers the question in appendix 2, where he goes into a very long, detailed discussion of Pingre's work. And Pingre was the one at the time was kind of promoting this idea that somehow the Indians got their stuff from the Greeks. As Tita just mentioned, he's done research showing that no, it was a two-way street, not a one-way street.
And Pingre's from Brown. And the late Pingre. He's gone now. We're trying to figure out the next birth. We haven't got there yet.
Anyway, but
came up with a lot of good stuff.
You did.
He did. Smart guy.
Yeah, real smart.
Very smart.
And also, he was pushing against earlier narratives, which were even less flattering to the East.
That's true. That's true. Yeah.
It was well said.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah.
But the upshot of Sadaputa's research on this is he takes various research that's done basing the Indian astronomy of Pingre's day with various other, astronomical accounts. And they do this little comparison, and just know that in this table, the lower the number, the closer the match. And he does these 4 different ones, is the one that Pingre uses. He tries a few others, and then he tries this one, which I think is really cool. And this one he calls, it's called a reconstruction based on the hypothesis of observation. And he said, if these ancient astronomers, and we now have evidence that they did, if they had good observational instruments, they don't even have to be that exact with these, somewhat archaic but very simple measuring devices. You can get, just by looking at the sky and measuring the angles, right? You can get an accuracy that trumps all these other reconstructions. So he calls it the hypothesis by observation. And he says, perhaps they were just looking at the sky. And that's how they got these numbers. They didn't have to borrow from the Greek, because anyone who looks at the sky and has these appropriate, astrolabe type instruments can get the numbers themselves. So that's interesting. Stita will talk more about that in 2 weeks. This brings up something that's very controversial right now. And this is going to come up in discussions at the conference on Saturday, November 18th. There are places in the Shumabhavatam where it is said that the coverings of the universe begin with water, and there are. Sometimes it says earth, sometimes it says water. But if you look at the ones where the coverings begin with water, so you have water, fire, air, mind, ether, intelligence, and ego, they all seem pretty transparent, all those things, right? So they're suggesting because the coverings are transparent, it should be possible for us to see the suns of other universes. This is this is under discussion as we speak. I've had discussions within the last week on this very issue with several devotees. But we've got this. This is from 5th Canto, 5:21:11 in a purport. This is what Prabhupada says. The Western theory that all luminaries in the sky are different suns is not confirmed in the Vedic literature. Nor can we assume that these luminaries are the suns of other universes, for each universe is covered by various layers of material elements, and therefore although the universes are clustered together, we cannot see from one universe to another. In other words, whatever we see is within this one universe. It's a very strong statement. So again, we're back to this: are the stars suns? Well, we have to deal with that, and we're working on
one
it.
little comment.
Yeah, please.
There's this major issue which our Sanskritists are working on. When the word universe is used in translations, there are several Sanskrit words that get translated universe. So clearly, the word universe doesn't necessarily mean the one that we're commonly using in English. So
Now,
how to
now, as opposed to used in English in previous sentences.
yeah. And so to resolve this requires the work of philologists and Sanskritists to dig down what is it.
Absolutely.
So and otherwise there's a big danger of taking a translation literally and ending up with absurd conclusions.
Absolutely. But this is a purport, so it's never written in Sanskrit. So we don't have that issue in this thing.
Yeah, but the verse had Sanskrit in it.
Yes.
It had the word universe in it.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
so-
If you're looking at verses, absolutely.
Yeah.
If you're looking at purports, you still have to deal with this.
Yeah,
In other
we do-
words, whatever
we
we
do.
see is within this one unit. So that's just something.
So a qualifying language.
Yes.
So we assume,
Yeah.
you know.
It's yeah, these are again, there's some qualifying language, and we see other things that appear maybe even to be a little bit different from this. So we'll look at all this stuff on Sunday, November 19th. So please tune in.
It's not confirming,
Yeah.
you know.
He doesn't say it. Yeah, he doesn't say it.
it's not
Yeah.
saying, I believe this, all
Right.
mixed up, you know.
Right.
I mean, not
Right.
that language.
Right.
So.
Right. Okay, this one I'm going to kind of skip over because Satiputta says, this is question 30. It's about the relative sizes of the moon, the sun, and Rahu. And I'm not going to discuss it because Satiputta says we have practically no information on this. Okay, so we'll go on. 3 more questions here. Thank you for hanging in. This one is, I love this one. The Bhagavatam says that Rahu causes the eclipses of the sun and moon. How can this be reconciled with modern science? Because this is one of the things when I was, many years ago when the 5th canto first came out, I'm going, what? We have eclipse dragons? I mean, really? I'm like out of my mind going, this sounds so, mythological and so primitive. But actually, if you look at the Prishni Sutton, which I didn't have a translation of then, it gives the same explanation of solar and lunar eclipses as modern science. So how do we reconcile this? Well, Bhaktivedanta, fortunately, Saraswati Thakur, in a commentary in the Chaitanya Bhagavat, this verse 2.209.
Chaitanya Bhagavat's about a 500-year-old literature.
Okay.
For context.
Okay, good. Thank you. I didn't know that. So he's, oh yeah, I did. Chaitanya Bhagavat. That's Vrindavan Das. So he mentions this. Now, of course, you know that Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Thakur was an astronomer before he took sannyas. That's what he did. He ran schools on astronomy. Now, so we're looking at this image here. This is exactly like the image that we started this talk off with, but you'll notice it's heliocentric, not geocentric. So we have actually basically the same diagram, but it's shown as the Earth going around the sun, and then we have the moon going around the Earth again. And here, what it does, it's different. This blue thing's the ecliptic plane, just like it was in the other picture. And we have the orbit of the moon is going to intersect the ecliptic plane in 2 points, right? As it travels around, right? And so here it says, when the sun and moon are at opposite extremes in their orbits. So opposite extremes. So one extreme is here, the other extreme is here. These are called, by the way, in modern astronomy as lunar nodes. So modern astronomers work with lunar nodes all the time. It's an important thing because of eclipses. These lunar nodes are going to determine when and where eclipses take place. That's when the moon is intersecting the ecliptic plane. Okay, so their shadows form Rahu and Ketu. So you'll notice here, you got the sunlight coming here. If it hits the moon, right, then the shadow is going to be cast on the Earth, right? So then we'll have a solar eclipse. So Ketu represents the solar eclipse. It's a shadow of the moon. Now, on the other end, we have the sun coming along. It hits the Earth shadow is cast on the moon, and we have a lunar eclipse. So Rahu represents the lunar eclipse. And it's very easy to describe it like that. So he goes on to say, sorry. When the sun and moon are 6 signs, that's, astrology, 6 signs, that's 180 degrees, which means they're diametrically opposite here and here. The residents of this planet see the shadow of the Earth fall on the moon. The shadow is called Rahu. When the sun is covered by the shadow of the moon, it is said to be eclipsed by Rahu, or by Ketu if it's the sun that's being, it's the Earth that's been eclipsed. Also, at that time, the lunar eclipse, or the Earth's shadow, is called Rahu. And the word used in the Bhagavatam is Kabbalah, which means swallowed. They say that Ketu or Rahu are demons, eclipse demons, right? And they swallow the planets. But the word swallow also, you can be swallowed by shadow. Swallowed meaning you're swallowed. You're no longer visible. It's assumed, yeah. It's assumed, covered by. Yeah, so there it is. Okay.
It's not a Pac-Man game.
Yeah, okay.
Maybe it is.
Maybe it is. 2 more questions. Thank you for bearing with me just a little longer. So again, this is going to be a huge discussion coming up at our conference, and we have Dvija Govinda again doing a lot of work on this one. The Bhagavatam says that the diameter of the universe is 4 billion miles. Well, that's tiny. This is much too small to even accommodate the solar system. What is this, 4 billion miles for the universe? It's a little tricky. And what to speak of the stars and galaxies, how can the Bhagavatam be correct? Well, the interesting thing is that Prabhupada actually cites Bhaktisiddhanta, who cites a figure from the Surya Siddhanta for the circumference of the universe, which is 18 quintillion yojanas. You multiply that by 8 is 8 yojan, or 5. It's the Surya Siddhanta. But we come up with this enormous universe, and I love this little diagram. I got this from Rana Mohan, where you're looking at this Siddhantic size here. It's a big globe, and then he has the Milky Way, which is 100,000 light years across. So you see that we get to some enormous size here using the Surya Siddhanta. So how does this work? Again, I'm going to refer you, I think I do right here. Yeah. So here's a paper. This is posted on our website if you want to read through it. It's very well done by Dvija Govinda, a proportional approach to the relevance of height in the Puranic cosmos. And so he looks into this in some detail using various proportionality constants to slide the scale. And so you can get some further explanation of that. And there'll be a lot more discussion of that coming up in November. Last question. This one.
In the context of that last one, did you want to know how big the space tarantula was?
Yeah.
931 light years, which is, I don't know whatever the unit was, but that's about 5.5 quadrillion miles.
Okay, so that's a good size.
Yeah,
that's a very good size compared to our tiny little Nazca line tarantula. Which was,
we don't want to paint it.
Yeah,
but I mean, in the context of the other numbers that were there, they might be related to them.
Yeah, they might. Yeah. Anyway, this is a little. It is slightly controversial. It's been brought up at a couple of our workshops already, and it's going to come up again at the next conference here, because it says right here. This is early on in the Bhagavatam 132. Within the stem of the lotus, there are 14 divisions of planetary systems, and the earthly planets are situated in the middle. So within the stem. So some people, and you can see this is a nice little poster that was developed several years ago and is still on sale. You can buy this. You can find it on the internet. This author, and I don't know exactly who that was, but they pictured all the planetary systems, the 14 planetary systems within this wonderfully curving lotus stem. They just took it back and forth like hairpin turns, right? And actually managed to get them all in there. But that's kind of a problem if they're all stuck in this stem. Then why does everything look like a vast globe, and it's described as a globe, and we have all these other issues? So how do we deal with that? And I brought up several quotes. I'm not other Shastic references, but I'm not going to go through them all because it's getting too long. But this one I like, and this is in a letter that Prabhupada wrote to Jadharani in 1971. And this opens up a lot. He says, all the planets are within the stem. That's to be understood, but they are seedling planets and are coming out of the stem. all below the lotus flower, just as seedling universes come out of the body of Mahavishnu. So I think that's a way to say, yes, all the planets are in the stem, but yes, they do come out when Brahma creates the universe, and that's why we see them, all these celestial bodies distributed throughout a vast globe-like system. And that's the end. Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Excellent presentation.
And I think we still have, I don't know what time it is. Do we have a little time for questions?
We do.
We do.
15 minutes.
Okay. Sorry that went so long.
That's
I tried to get it done quicker, but
very well.
thank you.
Fine.
So if there are any questions, I don't know.
Let's check the chat first. Let's get the chatters in chat. I don't see anybody there. Any chatters like to chatter?
There's a couple of hands raised.
Yeah, there's some
Yeah.
hands. We have Krishna Kirtandas. You can go ahead and then we
And should I stop sharing my screen, right?
Yeah, you can stop sharing.
Then we can see it.
I have a bunch of questions or comments. So maybe I'll start from the last one. So the Ketu and Rahu, right? So sometimes they're described as the ascending the lunar nodes, right? So basically, they are the nodes, I think. So they are on the eclipse plane, but those nodes are not the shadows of the sun or the moon unless like it happens to be the eclipse time, right? So when there is no eclipse, then those shadows doesn't actually correspond to those nodes actually do not correspond to the shadow. So how we describe them both as the lunar nodes and also describe as a shadow at the same time. So that's one question there.
Just quick off the top of my head, my thought is just because the shadow isn't falling on the earth, it doesn't mean it's not there.
No, what I'm trying to say is
would there be some shadow? I would think that there would always be some shadow of the moon at any moment, right? Going off somewhere, some direction.
Yeah, that's fine. But we said that Ketu and Rahu, they are the lunar nodes, right?
Yes.
The lunar nodes are not always in the same line as the moon and the sun. They're not necessarily on that line. I mean, when they're on that line, that's when the eclipse happens. But most times they are not on that line. So basically, most times these two nodes does not correspond to the shadow.
That's true, but nevertheless, and because there isn't always an eclipse, you can't. The way I take that is Rahu and Ketu are not always swallowing these things. They do on occasion, and you just pointed out what the occasion is. The occasion is when they line up. That's how Does anyone else have another explanation of that? And you had another question also.
Yeah. So the go back to the 7 Dvipas, the king of Priyavrata, traveling and create all these ruts. So the way I try to understand it is based on the next book, right? The third book say that many description there are like 4 different models in the 5th candle, and the different description can be corresponding to different models and not necessarily describe everything. So that particular statement, it may or may not corresponding to the cosmic model, of the eclipse plane. It could just be the model where the 7 Dvipas describe some earthly features, right? Yes. So it could just be describing that he created some earthly features on the earth when he's traveling around the earth globe, not necessarily, he's creating the gigantic, planets by his traveling. So
the issue there comes up when you start looking at the numbers assigned to these rings. They're huge. They're huge. And we do have models that map this huge Bhumandala plane onto the Earth globe, and you can do that. Yeah, and if you want to do that mapping, it's called an inverse projection map. Then you could do that kind of analysis, show where these ruts would be relative to the Earth, a spherical Earth, by an inverse projection map. And I don't know if anyone's done that, but it would be a extremely interesting study. If we could you'd have to have some real math skills to do that kind of inverse projection, but it's been done. And Murali Gopal has done a little work along those lines. So maybe we could get him to look at that in a little more detail and see if it does, if those ruts would correspond to geographical features on the spherical Earth. It's very possible that they would. But if you're looking at a cosmic scale, which it's generally described that way on a cosmic scale, then those ruts tend to match up. Those rings match up with the dimensions of the solar system, and that's where Doug was getting his ideas of this embedded time dimension that actually Bhumandala in one sense is talking about the formation. It takes millions and millions of years of formation of a solar system.
Let's move on to other questions. We can get back to him.
Yeah.
So
the next question is, you mentioned.
Can we hold off a minute? Because we want to make sure others have time for questions too, and we have limited time. We'll get back to you if time allows. Otherwise, we can correspond. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Okay, thank you.
Nishrina, go ahead.
Hare Krishna, Mata.
Hare Krishna. Nice to hear from you.
Yeah, so I probably did not listen correct when you said about Savai Mansing's variable scale for Yojana.
What about
the context and what is the Yojana is a variable?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Of course, Sariputta does he does a huge analysis of the measurements of the yojana, and he actually shows that the yojana, as it's used in the Bhavatam, in terms of its cosmology, is based on degrees latitude. So that's a very interesting analysis, and it comes out, if you get the exact number, I think he winds up with 8.49, something like that, miles for yojana, if you use it as based on degrees latitude. But we know for a fact that Sri Siddhanta, this comes from Bhaktivedanta, and you can do the math. Sri Siddhanta uses 5 miles to yojana. Then you'll also see, and Sulabh has done this research, when you look at the distances given in the Puranas between different cities that exist in India today, and he's done a whole lot of these. He's taken all these numbers distances that they give. And when you do the analysis, the yojana is 1.5 miles. And many scholars of this have agreed that if anyone wants it, I have a whole document done of different values for the yojana given by different scholars and acharyas over the centuries. And it's a huge range, huge. And there's a delightful Wikipedia article on this, actually, when they talk about the measurement of the yojana. And they do come up with the conclusion from all this study that the yojana is used as a sliding scale. It's used, if you're going to pin a value to the yojana, it has to be context sensitive. And that's true of almost everything that's done in Sanskrit. If you're trying to make some absolute statement on something written in Sanskrit, you'd better well find the context, because once you take that thing out of context, it really can be taken in so many different ways. So that's would be my answer. I don't know if anyone else wants to say something about the yojana. Does that answer the question?
Just no, it's an ancient measure of distance that sometimes can be related to latitude, sometimes can be related even to height of a person. And there's a lot of it's commonly used. And what the exact, and anybody who says the exact number has not understood very well the context. But it's roughly 8.5 miles.
That's when you're using it in a cosmological context. Correct. In the 5th canto, at least. I haven't studied enough. The other Puranas, I think, are fairly close. But it doesn't work when you're looking at distances in cities. So if you're doing geographical work, correct, you got to change it. If you're looking at the Jyotisha Shastras, they're using 5. So why these different values? And they also, it's a whole work that Antradweep did, actually, on the mandar. What are those sacrificial altars called? There's a Sanskrit word for that. There, the yojana is tied into a cubit of the king who's giving, that's a measurement, the elbow to the tip of the fingers. Exactly. That becomes the yojana. And it's based on the king who's performing the sacrifice. So it's tied right into the body of the king, and becomes a certain, what's a cubit? It's about what? 2 feet, less than 2 feet. So it's, take that for what it's worth.
Thank you.
Any
back to Krishna Kirtan?
Well, see if there's any questions in the room. So we circulate around. Questions, comments? Let's go back to Krishna Kirtan. He has the floor again, or the Zoom.
Okay, thank you. So when you mentioned the Brahmapuris, the discrepancy in the numbers, right? I think you mentioned the 32,000. If you square it, you get the other number, right? But that math seems to be wrong. So 32,000.
Oh, really? That was that. Then you can blame me for that because I was the one that checked Sulaba's math. So when you square 3,200, it doesn't come up to 10 million?
No, it's 32,000, right? I thought it was 32,000.
Yes, 32,000.
Yeah, 30,000 squared is about 1 billion.
It's about what?
Right. 1 billion.
1 billion.
Yeah, because 32 squared is about 1,000.
I did the math once, but I could have messed it up. So
He's right.
yeah. So it's so it's 1 billion.
And the other number I think says 10 million on the
10 million. So we're off by another factor of 100. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll correct that next time I give this to him.
Good catch.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know where. So anyway, there's some connection we can do. Maybe that's why Sadaputta didn't find that one because it wasn't correct. So thank you very much.
Sure. So the next one, this one actually caused me the most trouble is the half the Bhumandala filled with garbled water, right?
Yeah.
So
no, half the universe. It's below. It's considered to be below Bhumandala. It's not part of Bhumandala.
Oh, sorry, not Bhumandala. I mean the Brahmananda, right?
Yeah.
So half the universe filled with water. So then there should be. So in that half, we should not see any stars, right? There are no nakshatra located inside the water, right? They are all. So then but when we see the star, we see it 360 degrees all around. But according to this model, there should be only stars in half the universe shell.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So that one gave me the most trouble and make me feel like the Bhumandala maybe is the model, the Brahmananda is not like isomorphic model for the universe we're seeing.
Exactly.
So,
it's not. Yes. It's not.
So even though, although we are trying to map it, right? We're trying to map it to the bottom half of the below the elliptical plane. Mm-hmm. But I'm just saying, even that mapping itself is flawed because we do see stars on
absolutely.
That side.
Yes. And Sadaputta mentions that specifically. He says when you're dealing with heights, of course, you're only dealing with things above the plane of Bhumandala. Yes. And so you have to, you can reject it on that, or you can say, okay, they're just showing the northern hemisphere in this case. Interestingly, though, I want to mention this because if you look at the Sri Siddhanta model, which is basically the inverse projection model, where you take Bhumandala and you wrap it around the Earth, that Garbha ocean becomes inside the Earth, right? Everything, if you take a plane and you wrap it around a sphere, then anything that's below that plane comes to the inside of the sphere.
Yes.
And so that's how it's seen. If you read the Jyotisha accounts, they'll have oceans inside the Earth.
Yeah, and that also put the hellish planets inside, like below the Earth. Right?
I just thought of this though. This is just came into me, and I don't have time. We don't have time to discuss it. But interestingly, that modern scientists do describe the inside of the Earth as being semi-liquid. That's just popped into my head. Whether there's any meaning to that or not, I don't know. But that is an interesting, and it's actually a good chunk of the Earth they consider to be at least semi-liquid, if not liquid. And it's just that little bit, like the subterranean heavenly planets, are just a wee bit down below the surface, and that is much more solid. So.
Well, yeah, due to pressure and heat.
Right, exactly.
But also, we're getting, this is a little apologetic, but if we're getting these descriptions of this Bhumandala or Brahmananda, and they're using the word water. Is it water like it's in that thing?
I don't think there's any reason to think that.
Yeah.
Anymore? Is it a mountain made of solid granite? These mountains in the Himalayas that are 80,000 miles tall, made of granite. Well, geez, they collapse on themselves.
To translate water.
Yes. Basically, water from yes. Yeah. Well, water. If you look at it, the 8 elements, it's liquid. That's what it is. Earth is solid.
Well, how do you define it?
Well, there you go. So that's
water.
Yeah, that's the.
Yeah, so a related question is like when Varahadev lifts the Earth, right? During the flooding, what is actually lifting? Is he lifting the Bhumandala?
Yes. Yes. That's described specifically that he lifts Bhumandala.
So then how if the Earth's globe is like a marble on this plane, then how is the Earth getting flooded? Basically, is the surface getting flooded, or is the Earth actually the entire globe gets submerged into the Garbo Ocean?
It's actually described that Bhumandala slips down into the ocean, Garbo Ocean, and that's pretty interesting. So the entire surface would be flooded. Yes. So that's
okay.
A lot of handy ones.
I think it's time.
Okay, yeah, well, it's time. So we have to thank you very much. I really appreciate you all putting up with this rather technical talk. And I hope you'll come. I guess Leela's supposed to say that. So I'll turn it over to Leela. I was going to give a plug for the next talk, but I'll let Leela do it.
Yeah, thank you very much for attending, for comments and your questions. I will be back in 2 weeks, November 4th at 11 a.m. with Stita Dimuni, who's here today.
Show up and
He's going to be covering the Appendix 1 and Appendix 2, the same book, Vedic Cosmography and Astronomy. So please come back.
When do we begin mysteries?
On February,
No.
no, we're doing Alien Identity.
Oh, okay.
And that's February 3rd,
And then the
2024.
Judah Karma book club on hidden history of the humans begins in January. We were hoping to begin this year, but there's too much going on now to schedule it in between his schedule and ours, and we mutually agreed we're going to begin that in January. He will be doing his own explanation of his book. Also, the explanation always includes, okay, this was written so many years ago, do I still agree with it? And that's a very important part of what we do at these sessions. Is it current? Does it make sense now? And what have we learned since? So that's set to begin. Exact date in January will be announced.
Thank you very much. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you all in 2 weeks.